Welcome back to this special edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. Let's return to the discussion with the lead investigators of the National Beef Quality Audit. Dr. Belk, we've been talking about what consumers are looking for in their beef, and we know that they want to feed their families a safe product and they want a great tasting product, but consumers are changing. I mean, what else did you learn from this audit about what they're looking for in the beef that they purchase?
Actually, that's very interesting. As I mentioned earlier, we had a chance to ask some of our interview questions that were sort of open-ended. And so we asked about strengths and we asked about weaknesses in the beef industry. And then we were able, because of how we did this, to quantify those responses. And one of the things that we found across the board, so regardless of which sector of the industry we're talking about, is that two things showed up on our radar in a big way. One of those is that we need to be more transparent in how we produce and how we market and how we generate beef from cattle. And the other is we need to do a better job of proactively telling our story to the general public. An awful lot of folks are several generations removed now from any sort of agricultural production. And as a consequence of that, we just need to do a better job of helping them understand what we do every day, how we produce the safe and high quality beef that they have access to in their local stores.
And did the different segments express different opinions about that, or what did you learn there?
In this case, I think all of the sectors expressed the same opinion about this, that we need to do a better job of proactively telling our story.
So if we're going to do that, Jason, I mean, what role do producers play in helping consumers understand more about that, providing that information?
Yeah, well, producers, based on our survey, are doing a lot of things to intentionally influence quality. Like we said, animal health practices, low stress handling. Unfortunately, cattle producers traditionally have not done a great job of documenting that or providing information beyond their segment in terms of what's been done. So I think this is a great opportunity for beef producers at any segment to begin to document, record keep, and identify the specific things that they're doing to their cattle throughout the time that they're on their operations, and passing that down the chain.
So Jeff, let me ask you a question. I mean, do you think this BQA audit provides a platform to tell at least part of that beef story?
Well, the interesting thing about the National Beef Quality Audit, because we have so many of the various sectors of the beef industry that are evaluated or measured or information from, everybody gets to learn more about another sector than their own. And so for, every 5 years, you kind of open up everybody's window of what are they doing. And so people further down the line have a better understanding of what's happening more at the production end. And those that are in the production sector get to learn more about the retail and food service sectors and find out some of their concern. And I think it gives the beef industry a great chance to understand more of what it takes to produce beef all the way to the consumer, but everybody knows more about what everybody else's part of that is. And I think that's been a big part of the findings we have. It's not what the findings are, it's the fact that you can share this and people have a better, truer understanding of the people before them and the people after them.
Jeff, I want to go back to one of the specific data points you collected from a carcass standpoint. And obviously we've all heard that carcass weights continue to rise in our industry. Can you tell us more about what you learned about that in this quality audit?
Well, just as you said, it's no surprise that carcass weights are up. In fact, they're up about 30 pounds from 2005, and they're around 825 pounds for an average. The range, if you look at those carcasses, it would be between 600 and 1,000 pounds. About 95% of them fit within that, but we have some outliers that are below that and outliers that are above. But constantly, every time we measure carcass weight, it just keeps getting heavier.
And what kind of challenges does that present, or does it?
Well, when we get feedback from the food service and retail sectors, they've been telling us for years that the carcasses are too big or the cuts are too big and things like that. And it's a challenge because you think about this in the retail sector, the retailers are selling product by the pound, and so you have to have a certain size product that goes to the consumer, and it's priced by the pound, so that's a challenge. In food service, those products are sold on a portion weight basis, so 12 ounce, 6 ounce, whatever it may be. So as the beef industry increases weights, then that continues, to be a challenge to them. Now, over time, we've seen innovative merchandising things that have come about that are trying to, adapt, and we see a whole different way that beef is merchandised today than 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20, or even more than that, to try to reflect this. But it continues to be a message that we hear from the end user is that these cuts keep getting bigger. Now what do we do with them?
Yeah, interesting. John, what does that mean, and what kind of impact does that have on BQA program itself?
Well, I think it's going to be huge over the next 5 years. And one of the guidance that we received from the strategy team was to do a better job telling our story. Well, that's not just to the consumer. That's a story that has to go all the way up and down the line, talking to producers. And I think we've got our directions. What you're hearing here tonight is an overview, a 30,000-foot view of the beef industry. What you have not heard yet is the specifics on specifically what does the retailer say, specifically what does the feeder say. We're going to give you that information over the next year. Every month we're going to have a specific fact sheet. We're going to drill down into this data. There's a huge amount of data here that these guys have collected that we want to share with our industry to let them look specifically at some of these challenges.
And I suspect there are some differences as you get to different segments of the chain as what's most important to them, right?
Well, I think when we started this conversation tonight, we asked, what is the definition of quality? And quality in the pre-harvest side oftentimes is different than in the post-harvest side. So we've got to somehow come together and have a more uniform idea of quality, because we do not want to confuse the consumer out there.
That's a good point. And I want to follow up that quality conversation with Keith. You mentioned early on in the program 7 quality categories. So based on the research, as you think about how people purchase calves and feeder calves and fed cattle and beef, what is the #1 quality category?
Well, as a component of this phase 1, and we've never done this before, I mentioned earlier that we conducted an economic experiment. We sort of superimposed it over the interview process. This economic experiment allows us to make some computations that have never been available before. One of those are, what are the probabilities, or what are the odds, that a company that's in the beef supply chain would absolutely require a certain quality attribute before they would make the purchase. Okay. The second thing that we were able to compute was, well, if they didn't require something, then if we provided this quality attribute, would they be willing to pay more for it? So we have that information available. But when we made the computations for the odds of what was most likely to be the quality attribute that would be required before they would make a purchase up and down the supply chain, it was how and where the cattle were raised. So interestingly, what that tells us is that everybody in the marketing chain wants more information to be associated with whatever they're buying. And that's different. I already told you earlier that that's different depending on which sector of the industry you're in. So for example, feeders, they want to know more about the health management plans that calves that they're buying were under. Whereas when you get downstream to retailers and food service operators, they want to know more about the animal welfare, the animal well-being. How were the animals treated? Where were they raised? And those sorts of things. Were they raised sustainably? And those are all important attributes that we could attach to the cattle as they move through the supply chain, but they're different pieces of information at each market sector.
So John, is providing this information just the responsibility of the producer, or should all segments be involved in providing this kind of information to consumers?
Our producers are independent-minded, and they always have been. But are we total quality management oriented? And if we are, then everybody has to be involved in making sure we provide a quality product. If that packing plant has an injection site blemish, they want to know where that came from, and let's get rid of that. Let's stop that. And that's the good news in this audit, because that's just about gone away. But if on the other hand, that retailer is saying the consumer wants to know how and where these cattle were produced, that has got to go all the way back down the chain. Somebody has got to communicate that information. So it's not just a producer issue, it's everybody in the chain has got to be committed to total quality management in this industry.
That's a great suggestion. Gentlemen, thank you for these insights you've been providing. We'll be back with some final thoughts right after this. Stay with us.